Hey everybody, I'm Ryo Yamaguchi, the publicist at Copper Canyon Press, and you are tuning in to season 4 of our interview series, Line Break, which goes off the page and into the poems and minds of our beloved poets. We've had so much fun over these seasons, hearing poems, talking about writing, books, and life. It's been one of the favorite things that we do here at the press. So friends, for season 4, we have a format change. For this season, we are doing some close reads. Each episode will focus on either a single poem or a single topic, wandering away and returning and wandering away again along all the little paths we simply can't resist. The episodes will probably be a little tighter, a little shorter. We can't say for sure. Thanks for joining us. Philip Metris has always excited me with his formal experimentation, a way of thinking of poetry and poetry projects in intensely creative ways, structured in echoing architectures both locally on the poem level and globally in the construction of the entire book. His forthcoming work, Fugitive Refuge, does this marvelly with the Arabic qasida in a searching story of exile and homecoming, of leaving and returning that is at once personal, family history, and a history for all migrants, especially the extraordinary numbers of them seeking a home right now. At the center of this work is a sophisticated poem called Remorse for Temperate Speech that speaks of homelessness and empire, of the powerful and the disempowered, of what is said and what we know. It's an incredible poem, and I want to focus our conversation today on it. So Phil, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryo. I'm excited to be talking about this poem.
So I think to start, maybe, I wonder if you could kind of contextualize or give us like even just a little bit of a spiel or a blurb about the work as a whole, Fugitive Refuge. That's going to be forthcoming from the press in the next spring.
Yeah, super excited about this book coming out. It, really, as you said just a moment ago, I think better than I could at the, from the get-go here is it's really an exploration of both personal family history of exile and refugee status and seeking home um, for my specific family, but also reflecting on all the ways in which human migration, in which forced removal, ethnic cleansing are very much on our minds today in our world, where it seems that there are so many displaced and refugees right now. So the work is really sort of started out of an attempt to try to understand my own family story, the exile of my great grandfather from Lebanon, and the trauma of that exile, and then his murder in Mexico. So trying to understand the reverberations of trauma as they have passed down in my family, I guess, alongside all the other things that I was noticing and observing over time, particularly after the beginning of the Syria war and all of the refugees that happened then in the 2010s. It brought up a lot of feelings for me, and I realized that's at least in part because it echoed or rhymed with my own family story.
I love this understanding, and I think this is somewhere kind of in the footnotes of the work, this idea of the family history rhyming, with so many other experiences that are, going on now. And I think sometimes, I don't know, for us who kind of watch the world through the news, I mean, it can be so overwhelming, and we, just sometimes forget that there are just so many people right now on the move, like even as we see specific examples, and obviously in Gaza and also in Ukraine and so many other places too. But
Totally.
before we get, I guess, into it though, I mean, let's hear this poem. I'm so excited about this poem, and I do think it kind of sits somewhat in the center of this work, in kind of an interesting and kind of sort of motivating way. It's a bit of a pin, I think, in the book.
And also connects up to my previous work, Shrapnel Maps.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. It's a kind of not a postscript exactly, but definitely a conversation threading through that. So here it is,
Yeah.
Remorse for Temperate Speech. For I spoke as if I knew, to you who know how a house looks clothed in flames from the inside, you sitting in the smoke as if watching my prose only stoke the flames. in that stagnant room among stagnant rooms, where the powerful talk for your people, bound in the margins of empire's book, who speak and speak and speak and pretend to listen. May you find the wadi where water flows into future, and greet what has come before, where you did not know you knew before, the unmapped hidden wadi where past and future meet.
Yeah, so powerful. There is, I hear in this, in your reading of it too, this sense of, again, kind of back to this idea of a global arc, which is a venturing out and a returning and the seek for home. And I think, I mean, I think it closes, you know, the poem closes in that. I mean, there's, if I could use the word Eden and Edenic, like hope, something where the future and past meet together. Could you give us a translation of wadi?
Wadi is a valley or a ravine, some place where water would have run.
Yeah.
And I wanted to use the word in Arabic because I wanted the introduction of a kind of opening into a language that maybe an English reader would not know or understand. You know, there are certain places that this word can sort of open up for an Arabic speaking or Arabic reading reader that you know that others may not have access to. And I thought that that was just a way of kind of demonstrating that there might be places in language and in the world where we need them, and they may only be accessible in certain languages maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Sometimes there is no translation, or some, you know, that kind of thing. Let me, on this point, for those who are watching, I do think it'd be important to kind of show the poem quickly. So I'm going to share my screen just for a few moments here, for those who are watching the episode. That one thing I really love about this work, and that I kind of point out, is I love this sort of this serpentine or riverine kind of flow to it. You know, it kind of, it moves in one direction and then kind of returns to the other. And then of course we have that pretend to listen, which is almost like a label that's been kind of pasted along the side of the poem. And it was really great to hear you read where that takes place actually in the poem, and that it has a specific location in it.
But one of the most excoriating critiques of shrapnel maps was a book in which, sorry, was a review in which the writer believed, the critic believed, that I was sort of pretending in a sense to listen, that I hadn't really heard, in this case, Palestinian voices. You know, as it was, that work was really situated and positioned in my own subjectivity, which is neither Palestinian nor Jewish, and so trying to understand in proximity with both Palestinians and Jews this very knotty Knotty relationship to this place, which both claim and which is causing so much hurt and violence right now. Well, here's the thing, Ryo, and this is like just me being just totally honest. Sometimes we don't know precisely why we do things, but there's a kind of instinct that there's something important to it. And I still instinctively think that there's something important about it, that in my positionality, you know, and in the positionality of someone who speaks from, you know, from the powerful place of empire, that there's a lot of gestures toward politically correct pretense of inclusion, when in fact those can be exclusionary, you know, dramatically exclusionary moves. And there's something about like it not just being the words, but also enclosed in a rectangle, which to me kind of reverberated in a way that I wanted to keep.
Yeah. There's a formal thing to that too, and you know, and I see it as kind of as a stamp or a sticker that's been kind of affixed to a document that's already extant, you know, or something like that.
Interesting. I like that.
I mean, I see it that way too, but I also see it as enclosed. And I think this idea of enclosure, of sequestering, you know, the margins of empire, this kind of idea, is also really resonant. And one of the big questions I kind of want to ask about this poem is sort of the idea of home, but also home as like a structure or a place. The Wadi is a valley that you're mentioning. I mean, there's a lot of this idea of location. Yeah, in particular, I kind of want to talk about like place and location and how you're sort of thinking about tell me about the metaphor of the house in this, for instance. Yeah, if it's a metaphor or even, but yeah.
Yeah, I see it as metaphorical in my original writing of it. I should say that the poem is dedicated to Musab Abu Toha, who's in Gaza right now, and in fact, his house was destroyed
Yeah.
I don't know, a week ago. Um, and so when I wrote it for him a couple years ago, it was during another period of violence, of bombing in Gaza, and I was just thinking about him and his precarity. Um, so it was certainly metaphorical, but now it's sort of not.
Yeah.
And there's so much to say about the danger of metaphor, I think, and what constitutes refuge and security. I mean, people are dealing with it right now in a very, very explicit way. Um, I don't know how much or where we should go with this in terms of that conversation, but I should say that like even right now, this question about temperance or temperate speech is haunting me, because on the one hand, as a human being and someone who has a voice of some measure of privilege, I feel an absolute obligation to try to say something. Certainly to ask my Congress people, who I would, was literally just phoning a couple hours ago, for a ceasefire, to stop violence.
Yeah.
I also just see how social media is so inflamed by polarizing and violent speech and exclusionary speech and speech that's so intemperate that it seems to gather. That intemperate speech is an accelerant to a certain kind of further polarization. And so, I mean, I don't want to be some kind of liberal civil speech person, because that's not me either. But I think the remorse comes from my sense that, and I'm looking around trying to figure out what I want to say here, that sometimes one feels like screaming.
Yeah.
And yet I try to take enormous care with my words, both on the page and with others, and certainly on social media, partly out of a self-protective gesture, but also because I know how quickly and easily words can become uh, decontextualized or used, weaponized to hurt others, to harm others. So my
Yeah.
remorse is sort
Yeah.
of about like how to try to have efficacious speech, how to have speech that does something, without all the unintended consequences of speech that um, that destroys relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
I
goes back
think,
actually. Can I just say one more thing?
please,
Like
please, of course, yeah, but say many, yeah.
there's when I was in college, I had the great opportunity of studying with a scholar who was deeply invested in what he would call the nonviolent tradition, and so we read a lot of poets and philosophers and political thinkers and activists, and um, I was always, playing devil's advocate with his position regarding, whether nonviolence as a philosophy and as a set of tactics was valuable or the best mode. And nonetheless, I took from it something that I've always remembered and tried to work with, which is that within nonviolent struggles, there's a kind of a push-pull between two modes or ways of trying to get change, trying to affect change. And one is conversion. And we know this as a sort of like the Martin Luther King approach, that we would want to find some way of having someone change their mind, and
Yeah.
because their heart is moved in some way,
Yeah.
because they see reality differently, because they have been convinced, actually. And the other is coercion, which is, which is when, other methods or means of attempting to have people change their mind, to engage in actions which will leverage power in the various ways that they can be leveraged, like boycotts, sit-ins, and the rest of it. So I suppose I've sometimes erred on the side of wanting to reach people whose hearts I could change.
Yeah.
And I know some others, particularly at this moment, with the sense that a genocide is unfolding, that more coercive, and in this case, I mean, protest sit-ins, boycotts, divestments, the whole nine yards, seems more necessary. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is getting into such rich and complex and huge debates around civil unrest and the idea of coercion and whether or not we want to consider even that. Is that a combative move? Is it antagonistic? Is it or agonistic? Like it, versus the idea of just showing someone a truth and letting them be moved by it. Which even the way I'm putting it sounds passive. But maybe is more appetizing or something in a way. Like I don't know.
Yeah, and there should be space in any movement, in any moment, that people's spirits and their talents can manifest in different ways. But I think I've always found it really difficult to do that.
Yeah.
To So my remorse is sort of about my intemperance, really. I mean, in a
Yeah.
nutshell. Yeah. And then I wonder, as Fatty Judah, my friend who's also
Yeah.
who's had so many family members killed, has said, why is it that we've been denied the grace of rage? Why is it that we are not allowed to be angry about things that anyone would be angry about? And I
Yeah.
wonder if I've sort of disciplined myself. I've I've internalized a certain kind of imperial discipline that won't show my feeling. And so I want to just live with that question too as well. And that, I think, that's part of the poem. Have
Yeah.
I, spoken from a distance?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I think I'm reminded of a book I worked on many years ago that was about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid, and it was reconciling apartheid. And the book was arguing that a big success of that project was making space for anger, realizing that anger has social utility to it. And again, that's even maybe a cold way of putting it, but it is that idea. It is effective. It's an effective emotional mode,
Totally.
even
What's
just
the book?
sociologically.
Do you remember the book?
It's called Sing the Anger. Let me
Oh,
goodness.
that sounds wonderful.
It's from which Sing Peleus. It's from the Iliad, the opening of the Iliad.
Oh, right.
And goodness, I'm sorry. Sing the Rage. Listening to anger after mass violence. It's by a scholar who names Sonali Chakravarti. It's called Sing the Rage. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I recommend it. Yeah, absolutely. It's great. And I want to go back to this idea, well, anger and temperance and intemperance. And one thing, another thing I'm thinking about here as you're talking about, which I'm also going to be equally ineffective at citing, is I remember from when the U.S. invaded Iraq after 9/11, and a whole slate of, I was reading tons of things about it. And in particular, there was an article that was in Harper's, and I wish I could remember the title and the author, but the general idea around this article was that there is kind of an inaccurate binary that our political discourse has, that we receive in our political discourse at this time, which is kind of the idea that like a government will silence speech. Our society will silence what is what is disruptive, and this idea, so a classic sort of symbol of this would be like the redacted statement in like an official document, right? So it's literally censored, it's literally silenced. But this document was making an argument that was like, we've now moved into a realm where the obfuscation is through sensationalism. The obfuscation is because everything is so garishly loud, everything is so wildly intemperate that we're emotionally and intellectually overwhelmed by it. Like we cannot, so I mean, a great example is just, I mean, folks fleeing Twitter because it's this repository of toxic discourse, right? But the problem that becomes then is that, well, now we've left the discourse entirely. Now we don't see what's happening. It's become obfuscated, precisely because it's so sensational. The intemperance itself is an equally censoring kind of power, something like that. I'm very much paraphrasing like what's happening in this essay, but that whole idea has really stuck with me a lot. And it's easy to think about in the realm that we live in now because it's the internet age, it's the information age, right? I mean, it's the Barry Schwartz thing. We are overwhelmed with too much information, and I'm constantly asking myself that question of how that dynamic is always in play in this,
It's an astute analysis of a problem we're all dealing with, and I love the fact you brought it to my attention because I hadn't heard it. I've been thinking a lot about disinformation, about misinformation, about sheer overflow and overload of information and weaponized information, almost traumatizing information. But this idea of sensationalism as kind of a subset of that, or a kind of a version of that, seems completely accurate to me. 2 days ago or 3 days ago, last week, at the end of the week, I gave a poetry reading and I read a couple poems. And in fact, I read this one, and I talked a little bit around what's been happening in Gaza, and a lot of people just thanked me for it afterwards because it was such a much more quiet experience, and not because I had quieted down the necessary anguish, heartbreak, horror, rage at everything that's happened, but because it created a space for people maybe to grieve a little bit together, and through listening together. And I felt grateful to be part of that experience, and not be part of the noise, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I will argue about poetry is it exists in this realm of both grief and of collective grief, and also this dynamic we're talking about in terms of temperance and intemperance and sensationalism and all this, is that the beauty of a poem that as it is obstinate, the obstinance of a poem, and particularly this poem that we're talking about today, opens up not only the possibility but the motivation, I think, to hold in mind disparate ideas, right? I mean, to hold in mind, that what is the remorse? Like, is it the cynicism, sarcasm, whatever, those kinds of things. I always think the poems have such a wonderful effect in that way, where it just kind of opens language up in these ways. This leads me to ask maybe about the Yeats. So this is from Yeats, right? This is coming from Yeats, and we talked about that. And I was wondering if you could maybe share a little bit of, maybe even read the Yeats poem. But,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing I would just say, which is connecting exactly to what you just were talking about, is that Yeats has an idea that he actualizes in poem after poem, which is, as he states in a prose work, out of the struggle with others, rhetoric, and out of the struggle with ourselves, poetry. What he's trying to get after there is that for him, a poem at its best is one that's a conversation with oneself, or a wrestling with oneself, and these different polarities that exist in us. It's a kind of, not a disciplining of self, but a kind of coming to terms with our opposition, our self-oppositionality, our obstinance. And I think that kind of position for him came out of a sense of knowing both the power of revolutionary violence and also its impact, its rupture. He was an Irish nationalist who very much believed in Irish independence and freedom, and yet he was completely taken aback by the Easter Rising and by the sort of the resort to violence that occurred then, and then during the war, and then the Civil War, which ensued.
Yeah.
Three, pretty significant events in Irish history, and trying to figure out what his relationship to those could be as a poet. And instead of being a propagandist, he really wanted to speak to what he thought was the distinctiveness and the necessity of Irish freedom. He also wasn't about to use his poems as armaments, really. So I wanted to read the poem that inspired the title here, which is Remorse for Intemperate Speech by Yeats. Remorse for Intemperate Speech. I ranted to the knave and fool, but outgrew that school, would transform the part, fit audience found, but cannot rule my fanatic heart. I sought my betters, though in each fine manners, liberal speech, turn hatred into sport. Nothing said or done can reach my fanatic heart. Out of Ireland have we come, great hatred, little room, named us at the start. I carry from my mother's womb a fanatic heart. This line, great hatred, little room, has been a kind of little tagline to describe the sort of Irish predicament, which is unfair, I think, because I think there's great love, great beauty, great passion, great humor as well. But he's trying to describe the sense of crampedness, of unfreedom that was part of the Irish story for so long, and what that does to people. And I think in a very similar way to what it has done to people in Gaza, honestly.
Yeah, such a good echo. And well, I guess I'm sort of, did that poem stick with you in that big anger little room, right? I mean, was that, I guess I'm sort of curious how you got from the Yeats to this. Like, I mean, had you been thinking about this poem for a long time, or yeah.
To be honest, I don't remember. Maybe this poem didn't have a title, and then I was thinking about then the Yeats just sort of popped into my head. I can't really say. It was just one of those kind of accidents that led to a conversation, and I think that a lot of my poetry, I hope, is in conversation with other poems and other realities, for sure. I've been thinking a lot about Ireland for quite some time because I've been going to Northern Ireland since 2011, leading student groups, looking at the conflict, the so-called troubles that happened, and the peace process. And I've been going there partly because I seek so ferociously, I hunger so strongly, I thirst so readily for examples of societies that have moved through a process of violent conflict to something restorative and have some element of reconciliation to them, in a way perhaps similar to South Africa, though with certain differences as well. So it became a place that I became obsessed with. So thinking about the kind of colonial pasts of Ireland naturally kind of created a sort of conversation with thinking about the times that I've spoken, not just in shrapnel maps, but the times that I've spoken in ways that were perhaps too measured, too temperate, rather than trying to really clear a space for something new, for a new way of perceiving something. So.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I guess I hear in this too. Well, I'm harkening back, thinking about Irish history and Irish freedom and the Troubles, and I'm going back to what you'd said about Yeats. Of one of the phrases that stuck for me was the distinct and necessary, form of Irish freedom. And I feel this as being kind of an important element of this whole conversation, where, we're talking about several different histories and struggles, and looking for maps, looking for a path away toward reconciliation, toward freedom and peace. But that also, not every map suits the same terrain, right? I mean, there is a distinctness to each situation, and that's I don't know. I'm also hearing kind of in this conversation the need for space to make attempts with goodwill, and then revisions, and that sort of thing. And I feel like, I mean, at least in the case of Gaza, maybe that's kind of what's been going on for decades. I don't know. This like does it seem incremental? Does it seem methodical to you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, my words will fail, and my heart will quail at any kind of simple articulation about what has happened and what is happening, except to say that life was impossible in Gaza before all of this happened, and
Yeah.
it's, how do you get worse than impossible?
Yeah.
And that's, apparently for a while people started paying attention during this period because they heard the term open air prison, which seemed so stark and astonishing. And yet at the same time, there's a kind of negative halo around that, oh, well, what is an open air prison? It's where you put people who are somehow worthy that need to be sort of, locked away. And, how do you, is that a fair analogy, right? And then others have used the term concentration camp.
Yeah.
And that has all manner of valences as well. I mean, it's hard to just be human right now. It's so hard to be human right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just, I'd love to just laugh with you, Ryo. I'd love to just get together and
Yeah.
have some food and just laugh. And basically, I'm just just overwhelmed basically every day. Trying to do a little good as much as I can, and hoping that the work of poems, just keeps reminding us how to be human when we forget.
Yeah.
So
I think that's it's just very powerful. And I believe in it, and I guess I would say to that just that we can, each of us in whatever position that we are in, just keep trying, right? And trying to be good. I'm grateful that you put it in that way. I've been, at least in the empty gesture of my email, kind of textual email ticks, I've been kind of putting that same way. It's I'm just trying to be good for the best that I can. I mean, and if that means making a right choice about, and I don't know, anything in my day-to-day life, just always having that front and center a little bit,
Yeah. I mean, again, it's hard to be human right
Yeah.
now. It's really hard to be human because each of us is holding in our hands at every moment images of wars that are happening, not only in Gaza but in the Sudan and
Yeah.
and elsewhere. And how do you maintain a sense of just where is the here-ness of my moment? And why am I connected suddenly to all of this? Our Neolithic brains are not capable of navigating this, those leaps. So our technology is always godlike and ahead of things, and our bodies, our hearts are kind of struggling just to stay centered in this moment. So
It's I mean,
weird. Yeah. So
no, for sure. No, I mean, and it's interesting. The visual of the prosthetic of the phone, and that is giving you this world. And I mean, it's important to point out too that Africa has had this incredible string of coups, and that is going even yet still kind of unseen. I mean, at least in comparison,
yeah, totally.
Yeah. But I appreciate this. Well, I mean, at least the intention is there, and I don't mean to be Pollyanna-ish about it, but I mean, but it's keep trying, and the work, and I believe that the work is good, and the poems are good. So
thanks, Ryo. I mean, like I'm excited that the book exists, and that Copper Canyon is bringing it out next year.
yeah,
Um,
it's vital,
into
it's
we
necessary.
can't
Yeah,
imagine yet, right? And
yeah,
that's what we're always doing. We're sort of trying to write into what has yet to be imagined, so that we can live into something that's different and better.
yeah,
And why I keep going back to poems is like as simple as what Naomi Shihab Nye says. It's like it's rare to have to sit down and work on something and feel worse after after writing a poem, and to feel worse after reading one. And
yeah.
I do believe in that restorative necessity,
Mm.
and want to keep doing it. It keeps me sane.
Yeah.
Well, or it keeps me insane. I'm one of the two. Not sure
Yeah.
which.
Sanely insane, I suppose, or something. Yeah. That's a wonderful notion from Naomi, and I have not heard that, but it's so simply put, and it's just wonderful. It's just like you just will feel better,
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah. And if that isn't resolution, at least it's a way forward, I think, or a way of keeping on. Like, yeah.
Got to take that poetry medicine, Ryo. Take that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Phil, thank you so much. I mean, there's obviously we couldn't hope to cover all the ground that we need to cover, or that we can't solve the problems we need to solve here in our little Zoom conversation. But I'm just happy to have it nonetheless, to talk about this poem. Yeah.
Totally.
And I think to that end, I think I'll bring us here to a bit of a close, and maybe we could hear the poem one more time. I think I would certainly like to, if you feel good about reading it. Yeah.
Sure. Remorse for temperate speech. For I spoke as if I knew, to you who know how a house looks clothed in flames from the inside. You sitting in the smoke as if watching my prose only stoke the flames in that stagnant room among stagnant rooms, where the powerful talk for your people, bound in the margins of empire's book, who speak and speak and speak and pretend to listen. May you find the wadi where water flows into future, and greet what has come before, where you did not know you knew before, the unmapped hidden wadi where past and future meet.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Phil.
Thanks, Ryo.
Yeah,
Sorry for
and
putting you in the awkward position of having to talk about a horrible.
no, it's well, I mean, it's necessary. I'm happy we could have this conversation, and I'm happy to have it with you, and around the poem.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you.
I mean, for our best, for the future, and for going forward, and hopefully when the book comes out, it will be a better place. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, and thank you all out there for listening and tuning in, and for being present to the poems and in this world that we do live in and share together. Thank you all for being here with us for that moment. So we'll see you next time. Thanks.